Hey everybody, today I'm going to be giving you a Risk of Rain 2 item and equipment tier list. Basically, I'm going to be going over every item in the game, ranking it, and giving a minor explanation on how it works. My intent in doing this is to give new players a base understanding of how good an item is, while at the same time giving them an idea of how it works. For example, Wax Quail might seem like one of the most garbage items in the game as it only adds bunny hops to your normal jumps. However, that's contrary to the truth that it is one of the best mobility items in the game. And since Risk of Rain 2 is a mobility driven game, it's a pretty good freaking item. There will be some items in this list that are good on some survivors but terrible on others. Bustling Fungus Engineer, for example, is basically only good on him. I'll make sure to point out the items that are only good on some survivors, and I'll let you know which survivor that it is good on. Each item will be ranked using the S tier to F tier system, S tier being god drops and F tier being items you shouldn't pick up, and yes, in Risk of Rain 2 there are items like that. And you should always keep in mind that you're not always going to be wanting a specific S tier item at every point in the game. So for example, getting crit glasses is important, but if you're dying a lot and you're a very slow character, you might want to be getting mobility items over crit glasses. And to finally wrap up this intro, I just want to let you know that some of these are subjective. So if I'm ranking something lower than what you believe it should be, drop a comment or whatever, but it's just a subjective opinion. Anyway, let's get into it, starting with white/common items. First up is armor piercing rounds, which deals an additional 20% damage plus 20% stack to bosses. This is a B tier item and it gives you a bonus linearly, meaning that 20% plus 20%, so if you had 2 stacks of armor piercing rounds, you get 40% damage, which is pretty nice. That being said, when it says that it does 20% damage to bosses, this only means teleporter bosses and not world bosses. So if a Stone Titan randomly spawns at like stage 10, you don't do extra damage to that boss, only the boss that you summon with the teleporter. Next to Roni, we have a backup magazine, which is S tier. The backup magazines adds 1+1 per stack charge of your secondary skill. For most survivors, their secondary skill is one of their strongest abilities. So backup magazine giving you an extra charge and then an extra charge for every stack plus that makes the backup magazine extremely valuable. There are 2 survivors I think that this doesn't really matter on. Actually no, 3 now that I think about it. Loader, Rex, and Engineer. All 3 of those don't really care if they have more of their secondary skill. It's nice, but it still doesn't matter as much, so it's not S tier on them. That being said, Artificer, Huntress, and Mercenary all love this item. Bundle of Fireworks is C tier because it's kind of situational. It launches fireworks every time you open a box or interact with something in the environment, which already gives it limited potential, so it's not really that great of an item. C tier. Bustling Fungus is S tier on the Engineer and D tier on everyone else, maybe C tier? We'll go with D tier. The reason that Bustling Fungus is so good on the Engineer is that it requires standing still, which his turrets are always doing, and then it will create a zone that will heal, and the healing zone actually stacks. So 2 turrets with 1 Bustling Fungus, so that means the Engineer only has 1 total Bustling Fungus, equals 9% healing per second. On every other survivor, standing still is nearly impossible as the game requires you to constantly move around, or you're going to be one-shot by just about every enemy in the game. So we're going to go with a whopping D tier on everyone else but Engineer for the Bustling Fungus. The Cautious Slug is an A tier item. It increases your base health regen by +4 HP per second while outside of combat, which is extremely good, especially on Monsoon difficulty where you have basically no health regen. The later the game goes, this item doesn't become as good, but it is still extremely strong, especially early game, so A tier. Crowbar is going to be C tier. It is a situational damage item that requires the enemies to be above 90% health for the damage buff to even activate. That means on survivors like Commando who do pitiful damage, you're only going to be able to use this when they're above 90% health, which is something that you really don't want them to be above at any time. Energy Drink is a B tier item because it only increases your move speed while sprinting, which is something not every survivor can do while attacking. It still increases your mobility, but it isn't the best mobility item when it comes to move speed buffs. Focus Crystal is an incredibly situational item as the damage bonus is only activated when you are within 13 meters of whatever you're attacking. I would say that Focus Crystal is actually B tier on melee survivors and D tier on everyone else. The reason for this is that Focus Crystal only activates when you are within range of the enemy. So say you have a ukulele or an ATG, if you're a melee survivor and it procs on someone outside of that range, it will not actually give you the bonus damage for that proc. So even on melee survivors, it's still not the best item. Therefore, B tier on them, D tier on everyone else. Fresh Meat is a B tier item, which increases your base health regen by +2 HP per second for 3 seconds after killing an enemy. This means that after killing an enemy, you have +2 HP per second for 3 seconds, plus another 3 seconds per stack of fresh meat you have. If you're paying any attention, you'll notice that the Cautious Slug actually increases your HP by +4 per second while outside of combat, which just means not taking damage. So this is actually half of that. The only benefit that Fresh Meat has over Cautious Slug is that it will proc regardless of whether you are in combat or not. It comes in pretty clutch sometimes when you're getting hit by a Fire Elite and your Cautious Slug won't proc, but your Fresh Meat will proc. So sometimes it's actually better, but it's still not overall a better item than Cautious Slug, so, B tier. Next up is Gasoline, which I'm going to go ahead and put in the C tier. Killing an enemy ignites all enemies within 12 meters plus 4 meters per stack, and the enemies burn for 150% plus 75% per stack base damage. So Gasoline is actually a pretty good item for AoE early game, as most enemies have pretty low health, so a couple stacks of Ignite can kill them. Main problem is Ignite only does base damage, which is usually pretty low, but the bonus is that every stack increases its damage just a little bit. Not a bad item early game, but the later it goes, the worse it gets. Lens Maker glasses are S tier. Lens Maker's glasses gives your attacks a 10% chance to critically strike, aka dealing double damage. The only exception to this critical strike is DOT, so Acrid's Poison and tri-tip daggers, I believe, and a couple other things, but for the most part, every attack that you do can actually deal double damage with Lensmaker's glasses. This makes it an all-around good damage item, and it improves your damage across the board. An ATG missile, for example, can actually proc the Lensmaker's glasses, which will double its damage. That means that Lensmaker's glasses actually buffs other items at the same time as buffing you. One thing to note, however, is that after stacking 10, you get a 100% chance to critically strike, which means that stacking more will do nothing for you. Also, there are 2 other crit items in the game that give you a hidden 5% crit chance, so you should only really be stacking 9 Lensmaker's glasses. Past that, you're basically wasting crit. I'm going to go ahead and give Medkit a B. Medkits heal you for 25 health plus 25 per stack 2 seconds after getting hurt. The earlier you get this, the better it's going to be, but the later it goes, the worse it's going to be. In the early game, I would say that this is an A tier item, as you have little to no regen in monsoon difficulty, and the more health that you can get, the better, but later on it just goes down to B tier, as you're not going to be wanting these that much. Monster Tooth is a C tier item, as it does give you a little bit of healing, but it only does it from healing orbs, which are essentially melee range pickups, similar to the Bandolier, and it only gives you 8 per stack of health. So the previous item, which was Medkit, gives you 25 for just getting hurt, and the Monster Tooth gives you 8 for having to pick up things. There is generally a clear difference there, and this is a whopping C tier, maybe even D tier the later it goes, as the healing gets negligible unless you have several stacks. Paul's Goat Hoof is an A tier item. I almost would put it in S tier. I love this item so much. Paul's Goat Hoofs increases your movement speed by 14%. When it says increases movement speed by 14%, this means just general walking speed and sprint speed. So this is an all around the board increase in your movement speed. Unlike Energy Drink, which only buffs your sprinting, this actually buffs everything, and it is good on everyone because of that. PSG, aka the Personal Shield Generator, is actually an F to D tier item. Because of how shield works in this game, and the fact that there are several items in this game that directly give you Leech and Lifesteal, for example, Leech Seed is directly a Lifesteal item, and the fact that shields actually don't do anything once you have these items. Let's say you have Leech Seed, which gives you 1 HP every time you hit an enemy. If you have a shield in general, not just a Personal Shield Generator, but just shield, the Leech Seed actually won't add to your shield. But Personal Shield Generator actually affects your one-shot protection. So one-shot protection in Risk of Rain 2 is a mechanic that prevents any enemy from one-shotting you. As long as you are above 90% health, no enemy can actually one-shot you. As soon as you go below the 90% health threshold, you are allowed to be one-shotted essentially, because technically you're not one-shotted. A Personal Shield Generator gives you a shield equal to 8% of your maximum health. So once your shield is out and you are relying on your health pool now, you are actually at 92% of your maximum health. If you have 2 PSGs, which means 16% of your maximum health, your one-shot protection will run out before your shield runs out. So picking up even 1 Personal Shield Generator will make it harder to play the game and will technically debuff you. And because shield doesn't work with a bunch of different items, for example the Medkit, the Leech Seed, etc., it actually is a negative to get once you have those items. Therefore, D to F tier, D tier being if you actually don't have those items yet, and F tier if you already have those items. TLDW, PSG kinda sucks. Repulsion Armor Plate is an A tier item. What it does is reduces all incoming damage by 5 plus 5 per stack, and your damage cannot be reduced below 1. So essentially, you will still take damage even if you have 1,000 of these. The great thing about Repulsion Armor Plate is that it reduces all incoming damage, which means DOTs, so for example Fire Burn, will be reduced by 5, and that's usually the lighter damage, so it will actually save your life in a lot of scenarios. The damage reduction actually stacks linearly, so you have 5 at the first stack, and you have 10 at the second stack, 3, you have 15. AKA, it's not like Tougher Times where the more you stack, the less efficient it is to stack them, I guess. I wouldn't go as far as to say they are better than teddy bears, but getting them is definitely a good idea early game, as it will reduce a lot of damage that you'll be taking. Rusted Key is a C tier item. It spawns a hidden catch containing an item that will appear in a random location on each stage. I rarely ever find the box even after it got a buff and was made larger, and stacking multiple rusted keys only increases the rarity a little bit at a time. Trying to find the hidden cache is usually a waste of time, and it won't really net you anything positive, so if you find it, good, but if not, nothing lost. Soldier Syringe is an S tier item and one of the best items in the game, period. Soldier Syringe increases your attack speed by 15% and with another 15% per stack. This item actually stacks linearly, so once you have 2, you have 30%, once you have 3, you have 45%. Absolutely love this item, and it's a 15% increase in DPS for survivors that love to hold down the M1 button. Certain survivors like Artificer don't exactly get the most benefit from this item, as she has cooldowns on her M1, but the Soldier Syringe actually increases some abilities' cast time, so it will be quicker to cast certain abilities with the Soldier Syringe. That's a little hidden bonus for the Soldier Syringe. Not that great, but still, it's pretty cool. Sticky Bomb, B tier item. Sticky Bomb is an on-hit item that gives you a 5% chance to attach a bomb to an enemy, detonating for 180% total damage. Total damage meaning whatever damage your attack did that attached the bomb to the enemy, it will do 180% of that damage. Put Sticky Bomb in the B tier and not D or C tier because of the total damage it deals. Plus, it recently got a buff, actually not so recently, but still, it used to be 2.5% per stack, and now they doubled it to 5% per stack, which is a good damage buff overall. Stun Grenade is a C tier item, which gives you a chance on hit to stun enemies for 2 seconds. I always like having these in my run as kind of a utility. For example, against Clay Templars, when they are spamming their machine gun, you need to be able to stun them before they get it off, or you'll be shredded. Stuns don't work on bosses and some other enemies, so the stun grenade doesn't really work that well against basically any enemy you're going to face past stage 12 or 13, but for certain enemies like Clay Templars, it's a pretty good item. Topaz Brooch, I'm going to go ahead and give you a C tier now. Gives you a temporary barrier on kill for 15 health. The reason I give this a C tier is that barrier was changed previously in an update that makes it so your one-shot protection does not factor in barrier at all. So having a bunch of barrier really doesn't help you that much other than to tank a couple of shots. The later it goes and the more damage the enemies deal, the less effective barrier will be. Tougher Times, the old teddy bear, is an S tier common item. Tougher Times gives you a 15% chance to block incoming damage, which is unaffected by luck. Much like Repulsion Armor, this blocks all incoming damage. This includes fall damage and DOTs. Although Tougher Times does say that it starts out at 15% and then adds 15% per stack, it is actually a hyperbolic stacking item. In very simple terms, hyperbolic just means that it will not start at 15% and instead starts out at 13%, and then the stacking kind of loses efficiency over time. For example, having your first Tougher Times will give you 13%, your second 23%, and your third 31%. Also, you can never reach a 100% block with the Tougher Times because of the hyperbolic stacking. So no 1000 Tougher Times video for you. Also, fun fact, the only thing that I think it does not block is the Void Reaver's Death Implosion, which is little squid Cthulhu things that show up about stage 10. So stop stepping in the Void Reaver's Death thing. I know what you do. I know what you do. The Tri-Tip Dagger is a C tier item. It is a 15% chance plus 15% per stack to bleed an enemy for 240% base damage. This is good early game, but the later it goes, the less Tri-Tip Dagger does. Also, getting 7 Tri-Tip Daggers allows you to have a 100% chance to proc on a 1.0 proc coefficient attack. And because the base damage does not increase, getting more than 7 when you have a 1.0 proc coefficient attack does not do anything for you. Le War Banner is a D tier item. War Banner's effect is that on a level up, you will drop a banner that strengthens all allies within 16 meters plus 8 meters per stack, which raises your movement and attack speed by 30%. What a PogChamp. The thing about Warbanner is, the later in the game it goes, the harder it is to level up. The harder it is to level up, the less Warbanners get dropped. And because the attack speed and movement speed does not stack upon getting more Warbanners, the item is rather duty. A good little burst at the beginning of the game, but even then it's still overshadowed by basically every other attack speed and movement speed item in the game. Alright, moving on to the uncommon items. The first one up is the ATG Missile. If you have ever watched any of my other videos, you probably know that I love the ATG Missile because it has a 10% chance to fire a missile that deals 300% total damage. This is the easiest S tier in the whole list, as any item that does 300% total damage plus 300% per stack is an insane damage item, and you would be insane for not getting this as many times as you can. I don't want to go on a rant or anything, but I will say that the ATG Missile can get procced off of other items, and it can proc itself with a 1.0 proc coefficient. And if we remember the Sticky Bomb, which has a 5% chance to detonate for a 100% or 180% total damage, my bad. That means if you have a ATG Missile which procs and deals 300% of your total damage and then procs a Sticky Bomb, it will do 180% of that damage. So the damage numbers can get pretty crazy when you have items that do total damage and your total damage keeps, stacking. Anyway, let's go on to the next item, which is Bandolier. I'm gonna go ahead and give this a B. The reason for this being is that I've played with the Bandolier quite a few times and I don't often get the little pack that it spawns. It's similar to Monster Teeth, where the pack will spawn where the monster died at, which is not always in the most convenient place. Plus, Survivor is usually a pretty low cooldown, so by the time that you manage to waddle your little butt over to the Bandolier pack, your cooldown's probably already done. That's not to say that it's completely useless, it is still useful, but I'm gonna give it a B because it's not the most useful. Berserker's Pauldrons is gonna get an A for me, dog. Killing 3 enemies within 1 second gets you into a frenzy for 6 seconds, which increases with 4 seconds per stack, and increases movement speed by 50% and attack speed by 100%. Basically, Berserker's Pauldron allows you to have an 100% attack speed increase for 6 seconds with just one single stack. It's 10 seconds if you get 2, for just killing 3 enemies within 1 second. That's not really a difficult ask later on in the runs when you have more items. I definitely can't downplay the movement speed increase either, as it gives you a 50%. It's flat, much like the goat hooves. It is a flat movement speed bonus, so just whenever you're walking and sprinting, rather than just being an energy drink based movement speed increase. Chronobauble is going to be a D for me, dog. All the Chronobauble does is slow enemies on hit for 60% movement speed slow for 2 seconds, plus 2 seconds per stack, and it sometimes prevents you from getting good items from the teleporter boss. Pretty powerful effect. But in all seriousness, the only reason that this item is any good at all is because of the next item on the list. Deathmark is definitely a B tier item, and this is going to be probably somewhat controversial, I don't know. But what the Deathmark does is that enemies with 4 more debuffs are marked for death, increasing their damage taken by 50%. In other words, Deathmark gives you a 50% increase in your overall damage against enemies with 4 more debuffs. So you're probably wondering why it's a B tier item if it gives you a 50% overall damage increase. Well, it needs 4 more debuffs, which is item dependent. There is no survivor in the game that has 4 debuffs available to it. Also, the Deathmark is apparently bugged and does not actually apply any stacking beyond the first stack. So with a Deathmark, you're supposed to have 100% damage from 2 stacks, so it's 50% and then plus 50% from the extra stack. However, you're only going to be getting the 50% increase right now, as there is apparently a bug. But even without this bug, I would still be keeping it at B tier because you need 4 debuffs for the Deathmark to actually activate. Because of this little caveat, the Deathmark could actually do nothing for you if you pick it up early on. So we're gonna slap it in the B tier, and if it ever decreases the amount of debuffs you need, say for example 2 or 3, then it will be slightly better, but still not the best. Next up we have Fuel Cell, which gives you an additional equipment charge and then another equipment charge per stack, and also reduces your equipment cooldown by 15% plus 15% per stack. This is easily an S tier item, as it gives you an additional equipment charge. Items like the Praeon, which have massive cooldowns but have massive damage capabilities, will benefit greatly from a fuel cell. And even though I do think the fuel cell alone is good enough to be S tier, there are also other items that also give this a extra boost, so to speak. We'll get down to those items later, but it's essentially the Gesture of the Drowned and Soulbound Catalyst. Next up, we have the Gore's Tome, and I will call this a C tier item. Gore's Tome allows you a 4% chance on kill to drop a treasure worth 25 Dollaruskis, or gold, whatever you want to call the currency in Risk of Rain 2. The chance actually increases per stack, and the money increases over time. The stacking is linear, so if you have 2 Gore's Tome, that's 8%, 3 is 12%, and so on and so forth. I don't think this is a tremendously good item, as early on in the game, you probably won't run into very many Gore's Tomes, and even if you do, the chance is pretty low, and the amount of money you get is pretty low as well. It is a nice item to get early game, but it's incredibly rare to be able to get this item. And all it does is provide you with gold, which then gives you other items, so Alright, the Harvester Scythe is a A-tier item easily. You gain a 5% critical chance, and then critical strikes heal you for 8 plus 4 per stack health. So essentially, every time you crit with the Harvester Scythe, you will get 8 health. It also provides you the 5% critical chance only once. This means that if you get 2 Harvester Scythes, you will still only have the 5% critical chance. This is also, ironically, the exact same stat as the Monster Teeth. So every time you crit with a Harvester Scythe, you're basically getting a free healing orb from the Monster Tooth that you don't have to pick up and do anything else other than just deal damage. Stacking more of these is really important. 1 is enough. So it's a pretty good item, A tier. Hapu Feather. I'm going to go ahead and give this an A because it is one of the better mobility items in the game. And much like the Harvester Scythe, you only really need 1 to feel the effect. The Hapu Feather gains you 1 maximum jump count plus 1 per stack. So just grabbing a single Hapu Feather gives you a double jump, and if you're mercenary, a triple jump. One thing that the Hapu Feather actually gives you is the chance to negate fall damage. So say for example you were knocked up in the air by a random event, maybe the allied warship unit knocks you in the air. Right before you're about to hit the ground, you can press spacebar for that extra jump, and you will actually not take damage. Also, if you ever fall off the map, right before you're about to be sent back to the map, if you hop right before, then you will not take fall damage. Other than that kind of edge case, the Hapu Feather can also help you get into locations you otherwise couldn't get. Good jumps, 10 out of 10, A+. The Infusion. I'm going to give this a B. Killing an enemy increases your health permanently by 1 plus 1 per stack up to a maximum of 100 plus 100 per stack. This means that if you get one single infusion and you kill an enemy, your health will go from 100 to 101. This will stack up to a maximum times of 100 per stack that you have. The more infusions you have, the more your health increases permanently per kill. So with 2, you would increase 2 per stack. With 3, you would increase 3 per stack. And each one also gives you the maximum of 100, 200, 300 respectively. 2 interesting little tidbits about the infusion that will change up how you use the item. Shaped glass will actually have the amount that the infusion gives you. So if you have a shaped glass, the infusion will only give you 50 max health per stack. And if you get another shaped glass, it'll have it again, etc, etc. Also, the engineer's turrets will actually use their own form of infusion. It's a little nifty quirk that the engineer has where his turrets copy his items. I talk about it in length on the engineer video. It's an engineer tutorial video. Check that out if you can, top right. But in simple terms, when you have engineer turrets, they will not actually count as the engineer himself getting the kills, so his max health will not increase if the turrets kill him. Only theirs will, and once you place new turrets, the infusion will reset, meaning that their max health does not continue over. Was that too complicated? I hope you get what I'm trying to say here. Alright, next to Roni, we got the Kajaro's Band. This is an A tier item, maybe even F tier? We're going to go ahead and put it in A tier to be safe. Kajaro's Band gives you an 8% chance on hit to strike an enemy with a runic flame tornado, dealing 500% plus 250% per stack total damage. Again, because it deals total damage, I'm completely in love with this item, and the chance isn't that bad. Plus, the damage stacks the more Kajaro's Bands you have. Also, fascinating little tidbit when it comes to the Kajaro's Band, there's another band called Ronald's Band. If you have both of these, your chance to proc them essentially doubles, as every time you proc one, the other immediately procs. So having 2 essentially doubles the proc chance. It's not exact, but I'm safe to say it's around double. Leeching Seed. I'm going to give this a B. Dealing damage heals you for 1 plus 1 per stack health. This isn't entirely true, however. The value of Leeching Seed's heal is actually multiplied by the proc coefficient. So for example, say there is a proc coefficient of 0.5 and Leeching Seed, you have 1 stack, which means 1 health. That means you'll only get 0.5 health per hit from that attack. The only problem with the Leeching Seed is that it does not heal you for a tremendous amount. It only heals you for 1 plus 1 per stack, which means you would have to get 8 to match up to the Harvester Scythe's 8 health per crit. And let me tell you, it's not easy getting 8 of one uncommon item, and I'm definitely not going to be wasting that kind of luck on a Leeching Seed. C tier. Lepton Daisy, one of the most disappointing greens to see come out of a teleporter boss, is a D. Lepton Daisy releases a Healing Nova during the teleporter event, healing all nearby allies for 50% of their maximum health, occurs once plus 1 per stack times. Sadly, this item has gotten worse over time because now there is Focus Convergence, which is an item we will be talking about later, which essentially decreases the AoE of the teleporter zone tremendously. The teleporter zone is actually the healing zone of the Lepton Daisy, and if you are outside of this zone, the Lepton Daisy will not heal you. Lepton Daisy is already a pretty bad item, but once you add Focus Convergence, which is a pretty popular item, or so I think, then you have an even worse item. The heal's nice early on, but the later and later it goes, the less you care about the heal during the teleporter event. Another green item that really doesn't do that much, but I guess you have to have bad items to have good items, right? Okay, the Old Guillotine. Easily S tier. Probably one of the best green items in the game. I'd put it right next to the ATG. The Old Guillotine will instantly kill elite monsters below 20% health plus 20% per stack. Now, this is hyperbolic, much like Tougher Times, which essentially means that it does not mean 20% health and plus 20% per stack. Instead, with 1 stack of the Guillotine, you get 16% threshold. With 2 stacks, you get 28.6%. That's much less than 20 and 40% that it kind of describes you as. Also, because it's hyperbolic, you will never be able to reach 100% regardless of how many stacks you have. So sorry to kill your dream of getting 5 guillotines and instantly killing elite monsters, that's just not gonna happen. That being said, it's still one of the strongest items in the game, as elite monsters are incredibly tanky and they're exponentially stronger than their non-elite variants. And with most monsters becoming elites the later the game goes, the Old Guillotine is a must-have. Next we have the Old Wars Stealth Kit, which I'm going to give an A. The Old Wars Stealth Kit gives you a chance on taking damage to gain 40% movement speed and invisibility for 3 seconds, plus 1.5 seconds per stack. Chance increases the more damage you take. Now, this item is not a damage dealing item and is essentially just a save your ass kind of item. Once you proc the Old War Stealth Kit and get the invisibility, the other monsters will not attack you anymore. In fact, if a Stone Titan is actually laser beaming you and you go invis during the laser beam, he will stop laser beaming you. Needless to say, Old War Stealth Kit can save your ass later on in the game. Definitely grab at least 1 whenever you can, and if you actually have a shield build, I recommend you grab 2, as that will give you enough time to fully regen your shields with your invisibility. Predatory Instincts is an A tier item. Gives you a hidden 5% critical chance, much like Harvester Scythe. That does not increase the amount of times you stack it, so only once will you ever get that 5% critical chance. And its active effect is the critical strikes increase attack speed by 12%, up to a maximum cap of 36% attack speed. Every stack of Predatory Instincts actually increases the maximum cap of your attack speed, so more stacks equal more attack speed. This item gets better the more crits you have, and you're always going to be looking out for more crits, so this item is extremely good. Not much else to say other than Predatory Instincts go brr brr brr. Alright, Razor Wire is A tier, but I desperately want to put it in the S tier. I'm desperately in love with Razor Wire, and on Rex, this item is actually an S tier item. In fact, it's technically just better ukulele on Rex. Getting hit causes you to explode in a burst of razors, dealing 160% damage, and it hits up to 5 plus 2 per stack targets and a 25 meter plus 10 per stack radius. Although we haven't got to ukulele yet, I assume most of you know what it is, an item that essentially changes your attacks to other enemies. It does so with a very low proc coefficient, I think it's like 0.2, while the Razor Wire actually has a 0.5 proc coefficient, so over double proc coefficient. Plus, it hits more targets and technically does more damage, just, percent wise, which makes the Razor Wire a superior item statistically. Sadly, the Razor Wire only procs when you are getting hit, which is a pretty major downside. That's why it's such a good item on Rex. However, there is one item in the game that we have not talked about yet. It is an equipment that allows you to deal damage to yourself. Hellfire Tincture will allow you to deal damage to yourself. I'll reveal more about it later on the list. But essentially, a Hellfire Tincture with Razor Wire is actually a broken combo. This is me trying to spread my Razor Wire propaganda and trying to make it an S tier item, but for now, we're just going to call it A tier until everyone can accept the greatness that is Razor Wire. Alright, Red Whip. We're going to call this item C. This is definitely a C tier item. Leaving combat boosts your movement speed by 30%. This is all of your movement speed. It's essentially a Paul's goat hoof on crack, with the one caveat being you cannot be in combat. This means you can take no action move towards enemies, so you can't fire your weapons, etc, or be taking damage from enemies. Red Whip really isn't that bad. It allows you to traverse the areas. It's just worse than the goat hoof and the energy drink. Rose Buckler is a B tier item. The Rose Buckler increases your armor by 30 plus 30 per stack while sprinting. Now armor gives you damage reduction. It's just flat and it affects generally everything. This goes from DOTs to just, getting smacked in the face by a titan, so having more armor is definitely a good thing. However, most survivors can't actually fire and sprint at the same time. For example, the Artificer can't use her flamethrower and sprint. If you try to sprint while using the flamethrower, you'd cancel the flamethrower. So that is why the Rose Buckler is a B tier item. It's because you can't really use it all the time. Alright, Renault's Band. This is going to get an A tier along with Kajaro's. It has the essentially same effect. It has an 8% chance on hit to strike an enemy with a Runic Ice Blast, slowing them by 80% and dealing 250% damage. Now, I'm not sure if Kajaro's actually includes a debuff, but I do know that Renault's does include a debuff, so that means that Deathmark will actually proc based off of this. Or it won't really proc, but it will add this towards the debuff counter. Plus, as I said before, having a Renault's and a Kajaro's doubles the proc rate of both of them. So getting both is definitely good, so they both end up in the same tier, even though the Renault's Band does slightly less damage. The Squid Polyp is actually the worst uncommon item in the game. Sorry, Chronobobble. Activating an interactable summons a squid turret that attacks nearby enemies at 100% plus 100% per stack attack speed. Lasts for 30 seconds. Alright, so one thing I want to note real quick is that it actually lasts for longer than 30 seconds, or less than 30 seconds, I suppose. It's entirely based on its health, but it gets enough health to last it for 30 seconds, and it slowly ticks down from that. So if you were to stand by it with a bustling fungus, you could technically allow it to live infinitely, but why would you? Because it kind of sucks. It doesn't really do that much damage, and the only thing it increases is its attack speed. I'm going to give this a D tier, as F tier is reserved for only items that you don't want to pick up, and this is still somewhat useful, I suppose. However, this is definitely the worst green item that you can get, as the Chronobobble at least has an effect that you could use with Deathmark. Alright, from worst to basically the best, we have Ukulele, which is an S tier item. Ukulele gives you a 25% chance to proc Chain Lightning for 80% total damage on up to 3 plus 2 per stack targets within a 20 meter plus 2 per stack radius. Now, the great thing about the Ukulele, other than the fact that it chains damage and is one of the best AoE items in the game, is that it can actually proc other items itself. So those 3 other enemies that it is chaining to, if you only have 1 stack of Ukulele, each of those chain lightnings has a 0.2 proc coefficient, which means essentially 20% of the chance to proc any of your other items. So a Ukulele proc could proc an ATG, Renault's Band, anything that has an on-hit effect, a Ukulele can actually proc. Item is essentially where proc chains come from and is easily one of the best items in the game and deserves its S tier. Next up, we have the War Horn. Activating your equipment gives you plus 70% attack speed for 8 seconds and plus 4 seconds per stack. I'm going to go ahead and give this item a C tier because you need to have an equipment and to activate the equipment for this item to work. Definitely have runs where I've went without equipment for a long time, and even if you get certain equipment, say the Prayon with a 140-second cooldown, you're not going to be able to use War Horn that much. And for an uncommon item to require you to already have things set up for it to be beneficial to you, I'm going to go ahead and say C tier for you, dog. On to the Wax Quail, which is an A tier item, and my personal favorite mobility item in Risk of Rain 2. Jumping while sprinting gives you a boost forward by 10 meters, and adds another 10 meters per stack. So essentially, once you get the Wax Quail, you can bunny hop across the map at terrific speeds. This is incredibly powerful, as you are easily able to dodge stone golem beams just by pressing spacebar a bunch, and you can even dodge most wisp projectiles by doing this. Plus, the mobility it gives you, even with 0 other mobility items such as a Paul's Goat Hoof or energy drink, allows you to traverse the map pretty quickly. One thing I will say is that the more Wax Quails you get, the less beneficial it is to have a Wax Quail. So for example, if you had 4 Wax Quails and you're jumping 40 meters per stack, you're probably not going to be avoiding that much. You're probably going to be getting hit by things more often than you are dodging. If you've ever had a Stone Titan Fist, they kind of predict where you're going to land. A Wax Quail will essentially make it so you're always going to land on their fist and die. So try to stick to 1 or 2 Wax Quails, and stacking past that kind of hurts you. And finally, on the list of uncommon items, we have Will of the Wisp, which is an A tier item. I like to call this one gasoline on crack, because on killing an enemy, you spawn a lava pillar in a 12-meter radius for 350% base damage. Gross base damage, however, you can increase that damage by 280% per stack, which is massive. So even though the damage is based off of your base damage, which is usually a pretty low amount, the more stacks of Will of the Wisp you get, the more damage you get. Plus, the stacking damage that you get will make up for the fact that it is based on base damage and not total damage. Also, the Lava Pillar actually has a proc coefficient of 1, which means it will proc your items at the base rate of which they say. So Kajaros will always proc 8% of the time, a Ukulele 25% of the time, etc, etc. And the explosion can crit. So it's definitely a nifty little AoE item to have. Moving on to Lunar Items. These are legendary items which are supposed to be the best in their category of whatever they do. Starting out with the 57 leaf clover, which is the best item in the game, hands down. You can fight me on this one all you want, however, it is the best item in the game. The 57 leaf clover does is all random effects are rolled +1 per stack times for a favorable outcome. What this means in English is that the 57 leaf clover will take any time that you did not proc an item and roll again to try to proc that item. Will roll as many times as it needs to, or as many stacks of the 57 leaf clover that you have. So if you had 5 57 leaf clovers and it rolled 3 times to get a successful roll, it's not going to roll 2 more times, it'll just roll until it gets the successful time. Also, what it means by all random effects are rolled for a favorable outcome, this means anytime you would have been hit by like a fire elite and be set on fire by a DOT, it will try to re-roll that so that you do not get lit on fire. And another incredibly powerful thing about the 57 leaf clover is that it actually rolls every single time in a chain. So say for example you hit someone and then you proc the ukulele and all 3 of those chain lightnings, remember there's 3, have a chance to proc something. 57 leaf clover will then roll for a successful proc on every single one of them. So say your first one did proc an ATG, it wouldn't need to roll for that one, but the second and third didn't proc the ATG. So the 57 leaf clover will roll once for each of them. And this continues, so for example, say the ATG that the ukulele proc tried to proc a sticky bomb, the 57 leaf clover will roll if the initial proc does not happen the first time. And this goes on and on and on. So the 57 leaf clover will make proc chains absolutely insane, and you'll see just about every item in the game go off once you have enough 57 leaf clovers. I know what you're going to say.
The 57 leaf clover requires other items for it to be useful, so how could it possibly be the best item in the game? If you only had that item, then it wouldn't be good. That sucks, what?
Which is true, however, I don't think in any scenario you are going to have the 57 leaf clover before you have any other item. It's a legendary item, and there is a 1% chance to drop it from a small chest. In fact, in my last probably 50 runs, I've only seen one 57 leaf clover. So true, if you only had the 57 leaf clover, it wouldn't do as much as it would if you had several other items. However, it will allow you to proc the ATG missile more often, which is already an insanely big damage boost. It will allow your proc chains to do insane amounts of damage. So checkmate anyone who hates the 57 leaf clover. It is the best item in the game. S tier, actually no, S plus tier, because it is the best item in the game. Alright, rant done. Let's go on to the Aegis. The Aegis is a B tier item. Whoa, a red item that's a B tier? Whoa. Healing past full grants you a temporary barrier for 50% plus 50% of the stack of the amount you heal. The reason I'm going to be putting this as a B tier item is it is pretty item dependent. You have to have some form of healing for this item to actually work, as passive healing and cautious slug healing and even titanic neural healing will not count towards this. Anything that regenerates your health passively does not actually count towards this, I believe. So fresh meat is also another item that does not work with Aegis, I think. I'm not entirely sure. Instead, you have to have a harvester scythe, leeching seed, or a bustling fungus for this to even work. Even when it does work, barrier got nerfed to shit, so it's not that good of an item anymore. It's better on engineer because if you have a bustling fungus, your turrets get extra health with the Aegis, but other than that, I don't see it really being a great red item. Alien Head is an S tier red item. Alien Head simply reduces all skill cooldowns by 25% and plus 25% per stack. It stacks exponentially, which means that having 2 stacks will not give you 50%, and having 4 stacks will not give you 100% cooldown. However, you will still have a decent amount of cooldown reduction. It's a pretty simple and straightforward item, and for some survivors, such as the Artificer, having lower cooldowns is incredibly powerful. Stocks is an A tier item on every survivor except for Huntress, on which it is an S tier item. Upon killing an elite monster, enter a frenzy for 4 seconds where skills have no cooldowns, with an extra plus 4 seconds per stack of brain stocks. Now, the reason this is so good on Huntress and everyone else is just an A is because not everyone can actually use all of their cooldowns within the time frame of the frenzy. Say an Artificer, you can't use your flamethrower and other abilities in the short amount of time that you have the frenzy for, as your flamethrower lasts for basically the entire frenzy. Whereas on Huntress, you can throw out 3 or 4 glaives by the time the frenzy ends, and the glaives do an insane amount of damage. I'm trying to think of any other survivor right now that could actually benefit from frenzy besides her. I think Acrid would be one, but he doesn't even do a tremendous amount of damage because his poison takes a long time to deal the damage. So really, I think it's just Huntress that can do it. Also, the Huntress can essentially juggle herself in the air with her brain stocks, which means it's just a powerful item on her. It's pretty squishy, and if you get up in the air by shifting up several times, or using your utility skill for everyone who's not on PC, and then spamming your glaive, you can essentially juggle yourself in the air and keep yourself safe from most of the lower down enemies, the ground enemies. Pair this with a guillotine, which is something that will allow you to kill the elite enemies really quickly, and you essentially have a broken ass Huntress. Again, this is a good item in general, but I think on the Huntress it really shines the most. Next up, we have the Brilliant Behemoth, which is an S tier item on everyone. It is God tier. All of your attacks explode in a 4 meter plus 2.5 meter per stack radius for a bonus 60% total damage to nearby enemies. This affects all of your attacks, like it says, including on hits. So you can consider this an overall 60% total damage buff to everything you do. Galele procs, that explodes. Razor Wire, that explodes. All of your abilities, those explode too. Hopes and Dreams, yep, those too. One thing about Brilliant Behemoth that is not so great but also kind of great is that you only need really 1 stack, as the only thing that increases is the distance or radius of the explosion. So having 2 stacks of Brilliant Behemoth will only have a 6.5 meter radius, not very large. That's kind of a good thing because, you know, you're not going to be getting several Brilliant Behemoths in a single run. One final thing about the Brilliant Behemoth is that it does not proc on hits with the explosion. All it does is create an explosion, it does not proc anything. Alright, next up, we have the Ceremonial Dagger, which is my favorite red item, legendary item, whatever you want to call it. I give you an S tier Ceremonial Dagger. Ceremonial Daggers causes 3 homing daggers to appear out of every body that you kill. These daggers then seek enemies and deal 150% damage per stack. That is your base damage as well. So having 2 Ceremonial Daggers will increase it to 300% damage per dagger. Each dagger also has a proc coefficient of 1 and can crit. So this means that you could kill an enemy, spawn 3 daggers, have those 3 daggers seek out another enemy, which then kills that enemy, and then another 3 daggers spawn, and then on and on and on and on. This makes it one of the best items in the game, as you can basically play the game on autopilot once you get enough on hits. Alright, Dio's Best Friend. We're gonna give this a B tier on everyone but the Engineer, and then it gets an A tier on the Engineer. The reason being is that the Dio's Best Friend, all it does is upon death, this item will be consumed, and you will return to life with 3 seconds of invulnerability. AKA, it's just a double life item. You can have multiple stacks of Dio's Best Friend, which means that you will have multiple lives, but in reality, it really does nothing else other than that. With all of the powerful effects that the legendary items have, having just an extra life is kind of weak, especially if you as a survivor are dying. That usually means that you're not strong enough, so having an item that gives you nothing else in return for an extra life, well, kinda sucks. You'd much rather get another item, say a Brilliant Behemoth, that will up your damage and prevent you from dying in the first place. So Dio's Best Friend really isn't that good for most survivors. On the other hand, as an Engineer, Dio's Best Friend actually counts towards your turrets. So for the same reason that Infusion is bad on the Engineer, Dio's Best Friend is really good on the Engineer. Every time the Engineer places down a turret, it gets a copy of the Engineer's Dio's Best Friend. This means that once the turret dies, it will come back to life and use its own version of the Dio's Best Friend, as it only copies what's in the Engineer's items when it's placed down. Now, let's say you place down another turret, that will then copy the Engineer's Dio's Best Friend and have its own Dio's Best Friend. So as long as the Engineer has Dio's Best Friend in his inventory, every turret that he spawns will have a Dio's Best Friend. Irregardless of how many times that the other turrets have died, they will always have a Dio's Best Friend once they are freshly spawned. This is what makes it such a good item, especially when your turrets can't really survive but they deal a bunch of damage as they get 3 seconds of invulnerability once they do come back to life. Still, even though it does work pretty well on the engineer, I'm still only going to give it an A tier on the engineer and B tier on everyone else. Alright, Frost Relic, I'm going to give this a C tier on everyone but melee survivors, and then a B tier on melee survivors. Except for Acrid. Acrid's not technically a melee survivor. I mean, he is, but I don't think I've seen a single person ever go schmack schmack in other things' faces, so not accurate. Frost Relic, killing an enemy surrounds you with a storm that deals 600% damage per second. The storm grows with every kill, increasing its radius by 1 meter, stacks up to 6 meters, and then plus 6 meters per stack. In other words, for the item to even work, you have to kill an enemy, and then you have to kill 6 enemies total for it to be at its maximum effectiveness. Or at least its max AoE, not necessarily its maximum effectiveness. If you don't kill enemies within a certain period of time, the storm slowly shrinks. That's something that the item description does not tell you. This makes it bad for a lot of survivors, as, for example, the Huntress, you do not want to be within 6 meters of any enemy, period. I'll probably put this lower in the D tier, but I'm going to go ahead and say C tier for it because it does deal 600% damage, and there are some cases where you will be in melee range as a ranged survivor, so it's not completely useless. Right now there's the head 5T. I don't know. I think it's called the head stat, I think is what most people call it. At least that's what I call it. We're going to go ahead and give this a C tier. What the head stat does is it increases your jump height and creates a 10 meter radius kinetic explosion on the ground, dealing 2300% base damage that scales up with speed. Recharges in 10 seconds, minus 50% per stack. Essentially how this item works is that you jump up in the air, you press the interact button, and then you slam down on the ground. And that's where the 2300% damage comes from. The increase in jump height is kind of annoying, and I really wish I could turn that off somehow. But the added damage of the explosion by jumping up in the air and then, you know, sitting on someone's face, that's actually a pretty nice bonus, and it does deal a little bit of damage. So if you're lacking damage, you can just step on someone's face. Also not mentioned is that this actually negates all fall damage once you get the item. Loader mains are wondering what fall damage is, while the rest of us are crying in happiness. Alright, the happiest mask. I'm going to go ahead and give this a D and sometimes even an F. Happiest mask gives you a 7% chance to spawn a ghost of the enemy you killed with 1500% damage that lasts for 30 seconds. Now you're probably wondering, why is this D tier? It spawns little enemies that help you. Well, simply put, the ghosts actually suck, as the AI in Risk of Rain 2 isn't really capable of doing much, and it kind of lags your game a bit as well. On top of that, you also have the fact that certain enemies can actually still kill you even though they're your friends, quote unquote. For example, the little suck thing that the Clay Doomstriders do can actually hit you even if they're on your side. And because they only last for 30 seconds and they're slowly ticking down, eventually they'll reach the point where they'll do the suck animation and they will injure you. I was on a massive big god run and I didn't know that the happiest mask actually did that to Clay Doomstriders, and I almost died to my own Clay Doomstrider. Luckily I was paying attention, so I got to continue the run for a little bit longer, but I almost died there and it would have been entirely on the happiest mask. So D tier and borderline F tier if you don't pay attention to what you're doing. Alright, the Hardlight Afterburner is a S tier item. This adds +2 per stack charges of your utility skill, reduces utility skill cooldown by 33%. For just about every survivor in the game, this is insane. I think the only survivor that kind of doesn't like this is Rex, as his utility skill is kind of poop. But even then, he can have the new upgraded loadout, which does a little bit of damage, so it's not terrible. So for just about everyone, having extra utility skills is pretty major. Actually, no, I take that back. Commando, he has the poopiest one, so maybe not on the Commando, this is S tier, but still, you get to slide a lot, so that's pretty fun. The Interstellar Desk Plant, I think this is a D tier item. It really, it's not very good. On kill, plant a healing fruit seed that grows into a plant after 5 seconds. The plant heals for 5% of maximum health every second to allies within 3 meters plus 1.5 meter per stack. Lasts for 10 seconds. Okay, so if any of you understand what the bustling fungus is, you probably know that the Interstellar Desk Plant is just a much poopier version than that. And to say that a common item is better than a red item is a pretty bad look. The only advantage this has other than the fungus is that you don't have to stand still for the AoE to spawn, but you still have to stand still to get the heal from it, which, you know, kind of negates the whole point. So pretty bad item, and bustling fungus is just a better version of it. Nehukana's Opinion is an A tier item. I would say S tier on the engineer. it stores 100% of healing as soul energy. After your soul energy reaches 10% of your maximum health, fire a skull that deals 250% of your soul energy as damage. AKA, the more you heal, the more damage you do with Nehukana's opinion. So for most survivors, this is pretty good. I would say this is maybe S tier on Rex. Yeah, I think this is S tier on Rex as well, because he can heal himself. However, on other survivors, they don't have any form of built-in healing, so they're going to have to require getting leech seeds, harvester scythes, things like that. I don't believe this counts regen, similar to the Aegis, so fresh meat won't count, and passive regeneration won't count. However, bustling fungus, which is why the engineer is so good for it, does count, and if you have 2 turrets with Nehukana's opinion and bustling fungus, they'll be pooping out skulls and pooping out damage. So I say again, S tier on the engineer and Rex, and A tier on everyone else, especially if you have healing items. Next up, we have the Rejuvenation Rack, which is an S tier. Plain and simple, the Rejuvenation Rack heals you for 100% more, with another plus 100% per stack. So on your first stack, you literally double your healing. If you pair this with the Nehukana's opinion, well, you're going to be doing even more damage. So this is an absolutely great item, especially when you have a Nehukana's opinion. Also, unlike most other items that I have mentioned here, this actually does affect your regen and doubles your regen. Pretty good stuff. Right now, there is the Resonance Disc. This is an S tier item. At first, I didn't know what it did, and I didn't know exactly how this worked. But now that I know what it does, it is absolutely insane. It does crazy amounts of damage. Okay, the Resonance Disc, killing enemies charges the Resonant Disc. The disc launches itself towards a target for 300% base damage, plus 300% per stack, piercing all enemies it doesn't kill, and then explodes for 1000% base damage, plus 1000 per stack, returns to the user, striking all enemies along the way for 300% base damage plus 300% per stack. Now, that was a lot of damage in several different stages, plus a lot of extra damage the more you stack it. It's pretty crazy. The initial launch and return of the disc has a proc coefficient of 1, which means it can proc other on-hit items, and the explosion has a 0 proc coefficient, which means it cannot. This is pretty sad, as the explosion is the highest damage, 1000% base damage plus 1000 per stack, but it's pretty understandable why that can't proc. That's a lot of damage. Next up is the Sentient Meat Hook. The Sentient Meat Hook might be the best AoE item in the game. I'm fairly confident in saying that. This is S tier to the max. You have a 20% chance on hit to fire homing hooks at up to 10 plus 5 per stack enemies for 100% total damage, and you can increase the chance plus 20% per stack of the meat hook. So the ukulele can only proc on 3 people, this can proc on 10 people, and there is a 20% chance, which is down 5% from the ukulele, but still it's 10 people you can hit with a meat hook. Plus, it does 100% total damage, which the ukulele can only do 80% total damage. Also, the hooks themselves, which there are 10 of them, have a proc coefficient of 0.33, and the ukulele only has 0.2. So the Sentient Meat Hook is basically just a better ukulele, and I don't think there's a range on it either. So just think of ukulele on crack, and you have the Sentient Meat Hook, which can also proc its own on-hit effects. And boy oh boy do we love on-hit effects. Next up we have the Shattering Justice. I'm going to put this in the S tier as well. After hitting an enemy 5 times, you reduce their armor by 60 for 8 plus 8 per stack seconds. Now, 60 armor is pretty massive in Risk of Rain 2. I've already shown you this several times. If you ever checked out any of my videos before, please check them out. But reducing their armor by 60 usually results in a 37% damage bonus. The only caveat to the Shattering Justice is that you have to hit an enemy 5 times repeatedly for it to work, which of course the later the game goes, the easier this gets. Soulbound Catalyst, another one of my de facto favorites in the red item section. This is an S tier. Kills reduce equipment cooldown by 4 seconds plus 2 seconds per stack. The easiest way to use the Soulbound Catalyst is to have a low cooldown equipment, say like a disposable missile launcher or a rolling capacitor, which can actually get kills themselves, and then using a Gesture of the Drowned. This is another case of autopilot in Risk of Rain 2, where you're going to keep killing enemies with your equipment, which has a incredibly low cooldown, and your Soulbound Catalyst will reset the cooldown by killing more enemies. Soulbound Catalyst is one of the catalysts to my god runs that I usually have. So yeah, S tier item. Unstable Tesla Coil is an S tier item. Fire out lightning that hits 3 plus 2 per stack enemies for 200% base damage every 0.5 seconds. The coil then switches off every 10 seconds. Here the legendary items strike again with another autopilot item that requires you to do literally nothing. Just stand around, and every 10 seconds the unstable Tesla coil will fire out lightning that will do 200% base damage. A very decent AoE item with a proc coefficient of 0.3 on all of its little current things. Much like every AoE item with proc coefficients, the more on hits you have, the better the item is. Wake of Vultures, this is a solid B for me. You gain the power of any elite monster you have killed for 8 seconds and plus 5 seconds per stack. It's really not that powerful, and the effects of the elites aren't really that good. If you gain the stats of the elites, so the 2 times damage that each elite does, or the 2 times health that they get, it's actually a bigger number than that. That's all I can think of right now. But if you got those stats and the power of the elite, then this item would be bonkers, but it doesn't do that. So for now, it's just an added debuff that you can use for your death mark. And that's it for the legendary items. Let's now move on to boss items. These are the yellow items, and they're almost as rare as the red items, maybe even rarer sometimes. I'm gonna skip the artifact key because that is technically a boss item, but it does nothing, and it's just for the boss, for the Bulwark's Embry. So, starting with Genesis Loop, falling below 25% health causes you to explode, dealing 6,000 base damage, recharges every 30 seconds with a minus 50% cooldown per stack. This is C basically on everyone except Rex and Engineer, on which it is slightly better. Engineer obviously has 2 turrets that can fall below 25% health without risking the entire run, and Rex can get below 25% health, although that is still risky even for him. Although the Genesis Loop does do a buttload of damage, it's just you have to be at such a low health that you can almost die to anything else. Not the greatest. Alright, next up we have the Halcyon Seed. Summon Aurelian Knight during the teleporter event. It has a 100% plus 50% per stack damage and 100% plus 100% per stack health. Good luck getting any more than 1 stack, as you have to defeat Aurelian Knight multiple times for you to get multiple stacks. This is a C tier item, maybe B tier? No, definitely C tier. Aurelian Knight, much like every other AI in the game, isn't that good, and it's just an added bonus that can sometimes help you out with boss fights, but by the time you've beaten Aurelian Knight, he's not really that much of a big deal in the teleporter fight. Plus, you have to beat Aurelian Knight for this item to even work, and it costs a lot of gold to get to the gold portal. So this is definitely a C item, as it wastes a lot of your time, and time equals money equals power equals pizza. Next up, we got the Irradiant Pearl, which is the best boss item. This is S tier easily. Increases all of your stats by 10%. Your damage, your health, everything. Sadly, the only way to get this is by using a cleansing pool, and you actually don't get it every time you use the cleansing pool. There's only a slight chance that you can actually get it. A 4% chance to drop instead of a pearl. Also cannot use the recycler on other boss items to get this item. The only way to get it is by using a cleansing pool, which costs a lunar item, and it only has a 4% chance to drop instead of a pearl, which is pretty sad. But otherwise, it is a tremendously good item to get. Little Disciple is an A. Fire a tracking wisp for a 100% plus 100% per stack damage. Fires every 0.5 seconds while sprinting. You're really not going to be using Little Disciple that much during your regular DPS timing, as most survivors can't run while attacking. This means this is just going to be added DPS to kill the trash mobs as you're running from chest to chest trying to get new items. Not bad, but also not great. Next up is Pearl. I'm going to give this a C for a couple of reasons. The Pearl actually increases your max health by 10% per stack. However, it requires you to use a cleansing pool, which requires you to give up a lunar item. Now, you don't usually get lunar items by accident unless you accidentally walk over one when you open the lunar bud. Usually that means you want whatever lunar item you have. Trading that lunar item for an increase to your max health by just 10% isn't really that good, especially considering that your max health as a survivor, even the tankiest survivors, isn't very high, so the 10% isn't going to be a very good number. So because the trade-off is a little bit too big and cleansing pools are super rare, I'm going to give this a C. On to the Queen's Gland, which every 30 seconds you summon a Beetle Guard with a bonus 300% damage and 100% health, can have up to 1 plus 1 per stack guards at a time. This is a D, as for with every other thing that has to deal with AI or friendly AI in Risk of Rain 2, this isn't going to do anything. They get stuck a lot, they don't kill anything that you really want them to, they can't kill Wisp as they are a ground unit, so the Beetle Guard is very limited even compared to other AI in the game. Stacking more only gives you more guards, which is pretty useless. Titanic Neural increases your maximum health by 40 plus 40 per stack and base health regeneration by 1.6 HP/second plus 1.6 HP/second per stack. This is an A tier item because it increases your max health and increases your base health regeneration pretty tremendously. Because it gives you flat rates, it's always better early on rather than being better later on, but it is some of the best health regeneration and maximum health boost that you can get in the game. If you're ever playing on Monsoon and you see a Titanic Knurl from your first teleporter boss, that's usually a pretty good thing. Alright, now we will go on to Lunar Items. We'll start with the regular items and then we'll go to equipment. Starting out with Beads of Fealty, we're going to give this a solid 0. Literally all it does is give you access to a final boss. Well, not technically the final boss, that comes up in the new update. This gives you another option to obliterate yourself by fighting a boss, a scavenger boss. So 0, tier 0, Brittle Crown. This is a D/F item. 30% chance on hit to gain 2 + 2 per stack gold, scales over time. You lose gold on taking damage equal to 100% plus 100% per stack of the maximum health percentage you lost. Basically, hit things, gain gold, get hit, lose gold. This is even worse on the engineer, as the engineer's turrets keep the gold. Yes, you heard that correctly. The engineer's turrets unionize and keep the gold once you have a Brittle Crown on them. Pretty lame. The reason this item is so bad, I know some of you are probably thinking, wait, this gives you gold. What's so bad? Just dodge projectiles, bro. The reason is the Brittle Crown actually hurts you a lot later on in the game when you need a lot of gold, and it's harder to dodge things, and early on it's not very useful either. Literally just try to get a Gore's Tome and it's 10 times better than a Brittle Crown, so pretty much avoid this at all costs because it could end up screwing you later on in the game. Corpse Bloom, one of the very rare items in the game that is F tier. Heal 100% more plus 100% per stack. All healing is applied over time, can heal for a maximum of 10%, reduced by 50% per stack of your health per second. In other words, Corpse Bloom is just a rejuvenation rack with a negative effect attached to it where you can only heal a max of 10% of your health per second. The rest of it is applied over time. So if you had a Corpse Bloom and you healed 100% of your health, you would only get the 10% that second, and then over the next 10 seconds, you would get 10% more. Honestly, it's terrible. Just avoid it at all costs. Try to get a Rejuve rack. Don't even try to get this on the engineer. Don't get this on anyone. Don't get this on anyone. It sucks. Focus Convergence. I kind of like this item. I'm going to go ahead and call it an B. Oh, why do I call it a B? Well, because the Focus Convergence causes teleporters to charge at 30% faster per stack, but the size of the teleporter zone is reduced by 50% with each stack. You can only get 3 Focus Convergences before it actually does nothing else, stacking it further. So a 16% zone size and a 52% increase in charge time, which is pretty good if you look at it from just a numbers perspective. However, if you've ever seen that tiny ass teleporter, you will know that it will actually take you longer to charge the teleporter unless you're on a god run. Remember how we put the Bustling Fungus in a poop tier because it was bad to stand still? Well, the Bustling Fungus area looks pretty large compared to a max focus convergence zone. So while yes, you will charge the teleporter faster if you're standing in it, good luck standing in it. The only reason I'm putting this on B and not C or even D is because I kind of like the item. It quickens the game up if you're doing pretty well. Gesture of the Drown is an S tier item. This is easily one of the best lunar items and is one of the main reasons that there are god runs, period. It reduces your equipment cooldown by 50% and then plus 15% per stack and forces your equipment to activate whenever it is off cooldown. So if you have a Prayon with a Gesture of the Drown, every 70 seconds your Gesture of the Drown will be using your Prayon. I think the Royal Capacitor is the only equipment that technically doesn't go off once the Gesture of the Drown sets it off cooldown. That's because you have to aim it at something and it has to be targeted on someone for it to be even used. Again, another autopilot item which allows you to basically take your hands off the keyboard and kill everything on the map. Shaped Glass is... can I call this S tier? Is this S tier? I think it's comfortable to call it S tier. Glass increases your base damage by 100% plus 100% per stack and reduces maximum health by 50%. The thing about the Shaped Glass that makes it so good is that it stacks exponentially. So for example, if you have 1 Shaped Glass, you do 200% damage because it doubles your damage. If you have 2 Shaped Glass, what do you think is going to happen? If you think 300% damage, well, you're wrong. You actually get 400% damage, and then on your third stack, you get 800% damage. So with 3 Shaped Glass, you're getting 8 times the amount of damage that you're used to. While you are having your health all the way down to 12%, do so much damage you really don't need health anymore. Shaped Glass is arguably one of the strongest items in the game, period. Not just in Lunar Items, because there is no other way of increasing your base damage to this extreme. Again, this increases your base damage, which means all of those items that basically say this does 20% of your base damage per second will now be increased by that much. An item that benefits other items? Sign me up. Next is the Strides of Heresy. Replace your utility skill with Shadow Fade. Fade away, becoming intangible and gaining 30% movement speed and heal for 25% of your maximum health. Lasts for 3 seconds. This is D tier on most survivors as their utility skill is pretty good. However, on Rex and Commando you can float this, so technically it would be like a C tier item for them. But even still, this isn't very powerful, as while you're in the Strides of Heresy Shadow Fade, you can't deal any damage and you're kind of just floating around like a little wisp. Transcendence is D tier. Convert all but 1 health into regenerating shields and gain 50% plus 25% per stack maximum health. This item is really not good for survivors that are super squishy, as you are reducing the effectiveness of your health, but for multi and loader and some of the tankier boys, Transcendence couldn't be that bad. If you have 3 Old War stealth kits, you can guarantee your shields will recharge all the way up during your invincibility, so it's not terrible. Also, Infusion will give you 150 shields instead of the 100 health because you have Transcendence. That being said, all of your healing items will no longer work. Bustling Fungus won't heal your shield, Leeching Shield won't heal your shield, and Harvester Scythe won't heal your shield. Also, Fresh Meat won't work, and a few other things won't work, I believe. Essentially, the only thing that will work now is waiting for your shield to regenerate, which is kind of a pain in the butt. So if you have a lot of healing items already, do not pick up a Transcendence as you're just nerfing yourself. Finally, we have Visions of Heresy. Place your primary skill with Hungering Gaze. Fire a flurry of tracking shards that detonate after a delay, dealing 120% base damage, holds up to 12 charges plus 12 per stack, that reload after 2 seconds plus 2 per stack. Visions of Heresy is an F on a lot of survivors and a C on some. Your primary skill as a survivor is usually a pretty good one. For example, if you tried to use Visions of Heresy on multi, I would probably find you and murder you. But if you replaced your primary on Acrid or Artificer, I'd be okay with that. That's a C tier item on them. There are a couple of things to note about the Hungering Gaze though, the primary ability. The initial hit has a 0.1 proc coefficient, so that means 10% of the already whatever chance that you had. So a ukulele having a 20% chance would be 10% of that 20% chance. And then the explosion itself has a 1.0. Technically speaking, this actually gives you a 1.1 proc coefficient on your primary attack. Visions of Heresy actually does have a weird spread on the attack. However, when you have it on your engineer turrets, which if you get this on the engineer, it will affect your turrets, it does not have that weird spread, and your turrets basically just aimbot. Alright, so let's move on to equipment, and this will include every piece of equipment, even the Lunar. Flash Shower, D. Cleanse all negative effects, including debuffs, damage over time, and nearby projectiles. You can definitely pick this up if you have no other item available to you, but it's probably one of the worst equipment in the game, as all it does is cleanse the negative effects on a 20-second cooldown. That's it. Alright, the disposable missile launcher is S tier with Gesture of the Drowned and A tier anytime other than that. You fire a swarm of 12 missiles that deal 12 times 300% damage. Each missile has a 1.0 proc coefficient, which means that each missile can proc. The disposable missile launcher has a 45-second cooldown, which is pretty large, but if you have a Gesture of the Drowned, it will automatically proc itself and go seek out enemies at like a 20-second cooldown or something like that. But it's one of my favorite items to get once I have a Gesture of the Drowned. I pick it over Praeon and sometimes even Royal Capacitor. The Eccentric Vase, one of the worst items in the game, period, but also I think the worst equipment. Create a quantum tunnel of up to 1,000 meter in length and lasts 30 seconds. This has a 45-second cooldown. So for the exact same cooldown as the disposable missile launcher, you can create a tunnel that you can still get hit in. Woo! This item sucks, and it used to be even worse. I think it had a 90-second cooldown last time I checked. And like I said, you can still get hit in it, and it's pretty slow and doesn't do anything else. And if you come out at the end, you can take fall damage from it. There's no redeemable quality to this item. So I'm going to give it a D tier because you can pick it up and use it, but I don't know why you would ever want to. Foreign Fruit, I'm going to give this a B tier. Instantly heal for 50% of your maximum health on a 45-second cooldown. Jeez, there's a lot of 45-second cooldowns on these. So, to use the Foreign Fruit practically, it's basically a no shit button. If you have a fuel cell or a Gesture of the Drowned, the item gets better, but really all it is I got low, I need to press a button, and now I'm back to full health. The Fuel Array, I don't even want to count this one, but I just wanted to take an extra second to shit on the Eccentric Vase, so I'm going to say that the Fuel Array is slightly above Eccentric Vase in the tier list, because it at least gives me a character. Alright, Gnarled Wood Sprite. Gain a Wood Sprite follower that heals you for 1.5% of your maximum health per second. Can be sent to an ally to heal them for 10% of their maximum health. If you are solo, I'm pretty sure you can send this to heal yourself for 10% of your maximum health. This is A tier because it's slightly less effective than a foreign fruit, but technically speaking it's better overall as it will constantly heal you, and then you can also use it for a 10% maximum health boost on a 15-second cooldown nonetheless. Jade Elephant is a B tier item which gives you 500 armor for 5 seconds on a 45-second cooldown. 500 armor is an 83% damage reduction. So if for some reason you wanted to jump in the mouth of a magma worm or decided to hug an imp, you can pop this and do those two activities freely. Milky Chrysalis is a C tier item which allows you to fly for 15 seconds and gains 20% movement speed for the duration, with a 60-second cooldown. Not terrible for early game movement, but later in the game, if I see this, I feel like I want to destroy it. Ocular HUD gains a 100% critical strike chance for 8 seconds on a 60-second cooldown. Earlier in the game that you get the Ocular HUD, the better it's going to be, as you're going to have no crit chance at the beginning and more crit chance at the end. This is an A early in the game, but B to C to D to F as you get later. As again, you can't get past 100% critical strike chance, so once you reach that cap, there's no point in picking up the equipment. The Prayon Accumulator is an A tier item which fires Prayon tendrils, zapping enemies within 35 meters for up to 600% damage per second. On contact, detonate in an enormous 20-meter explosion for 4,000% damage. This is on a 140-second cooldown. So with all of that massive damage, you have a massive cooldown. The more equipment CDR you have, from fuel cells and Gesture of the Drowns, the better this gets, but there's still better items once you get those items anyway, so this is just a big raw damage item for killing off bosses. The Primordial Cube. This is a B. Fire a black hole that draws enemies within 30 meters to its center. Lasts for 10 seconds on a 60-second cooldown. If you're a big fat AoE survivor, then this Primordial Cube will be really good for you. Artificer can wall off and basically kill everyone in the Primordial Cube, but the cube itself doesn't really do any damage, and if you don't have AoE, say you're a commando, then there's not really much you can do with the cube's effect. Still a pretty good item though. The radar scanner, I'm going to give this a D. Reveal all interactables within 500 meters for 10 seconds on a 45-second cooldown. The one use of the radar scanner is to find other better equipment. So not completely useless, just, you know, meh. And we've got the recycler. This is a B to me. Transfer an item or equipment into a different one can only be converted into the same tier one time. So essentially, the recycler will turn any item into a different item of the same rarity. So if you got a war banner, there is a chance you could turn it into a soldier syringe, a goat hoof, crit glasses, anything like that. You can only turn it into a different item once. This isn't a bad item by any means. In fact, it's a really good item. For example, what if you got a really bad legendary, but then you use the recycler and turn it into a really good legendary? Problem being, you have to lug around the recycler through all of these stages, and there are way better equipment that you could be using the entire time. Basically, you have to rely on you having really shitty luck for this to be any use to you at all. So that's a B. Royal Capacitor, S tier, S tier, S tier, S tier. Hold down a lightning strike on a targeted monster, dealing 3000% damage and stunning nearby monsters on a 20-second cooldown. This is the third lowest cooldown item in the equipment list, and the Royal Capacitor deals almost the most damage out of all of them. Crowbars, Gestures of the Drown, and fuel cells will make this item extremely powerful and can basically carry you through runs just by having this equipment alone. The Sawmorang. Throw 3 large saw blades that slice through enemies for 3 times 400% damage, also deal an additional 3 times 100% damage per second while bleeding enemies. Can strike enemies again on the way back. Sawmorang has a 45-second cooldown, which is one of the main reasons I'm going to be putting this in the B tier. It does do decent amount of damage, however the cooldown is just too long compared to other items in this list. Next we have the backup, which I'm giving a D. Call 4 strike drones to fight for you, last 25 seconds on a 100-second cooldown. These strike drones really do almost nothing. They are killed very quickly by other enemies, and they die after the 25 seconds are up. Pair that with the fact that the 100-second cooldown is pretty massive. It's one of the largest in the equipment list, and you have one of the worst items on the entire equipment tier list. Speaking of terrible items, the Crowdfunder. The Crowdfunder is D tier to F tier. Fires a continuous barrage that deals 100% damage per bullet, costs 1 gold per bullet, costs increase over time. In other words, the only way that the Crowdfunder scales is against you. While the Crowdfunder can deal a good amount of damage, as it will proc on hits and it does have a proc coefficient attached to it, you have to use up a lot of your money for it. If you have 2 brittle crowns, you can hold the crown funder indefinitely, assuming you're hitting enemies with it, but that's a lot to ask for an item that really doesn't do much, and you could just pick up a roll capacitor and it will be 10 times better, so this is D tier. Volcanic Egg is a whopping C tier. You turn into a draconic fireball for 5 seconds, dealing 500% damage on impact, detonates at the end for 800% damage. Main reason I put this in C tier is because the mobility it gives you is pretty nice. You can go around different areas and you kind of float in the air. It's a more precise milky chrysalis essentially. Also, it has a pretty low cooldown and does a little bit of damage, so you can kill a couple of wisps if you really want to. Alright, moving on to lunar equipment. These are usually pretty bad, so there's probably going to be a couple F tiers in here. Effigy of Grief. This is F tier. All characters within the AoE are slowed by 50% and have their armor reduced by 20. Now, when they say all characters, they mean you and enemies and allies. And since you're slowed while you're in it, getting out of the AoE is very difficult unless you are a mobility survivor. Why would you pick up an item that's going to debuff you when you could pick up an item that won't debuff you? Glowing Meteorite. Another F tier on the lunar equipment. This is the biggest meme item in the game. You rain meteors from the sky, damaging all characters for 600% damage per blast. Lasts 20 seconds on a 140-second cooldown. These meteors go through Engineer Shield, they go through everything, they go through my heart. They are really hard to dodge if you're not a fast character, and if you ever see one of your friends pick it up, immediately run away from them as quickly as you can. Fire Tincture. This is it's very hard to classify it. It's very situational. I would say it's C tier for melee survivors and D to F tier for everyone else. Similar to the Frost Relic, this actually ignites all characters within 8 meters, deals 5% of your maximum health per second as burning to yourself. The burn is half as strong on allies and 24 times stronger on enemies. So the tankier you are, the more damage you will be doing with the Hellfire Tincture. It actually has a bigger range radius than the Frost Relic, so technically you can call it better in that scenario. However, you're not going to be dealing more damage than the Frost Relic with this. Also, the Hellfire Tincture can be used to proc Razor Wire on command. With a Gesture of the Drowned or Fuel Cells or a couple of both, you can have 100% uptime on Hellfire Tincture, which essentially means 100% uptime on your Razor Wire procs. So in that case, this is actually an S tier item, but in any other situation, it's C to F to D to, lower tier. And finally, we have Spinal Tonic. Spinal Tonic is an S if you can have 100% uptime on it. Here's why. If you drink the tonic, aka activate the tonic, you gain a boost for 20 seconds, which increases your damage by 100%, attack speed by 70%, armor by 20%, and maximum health by 50%, and passive health regeneration by 300%, and finally, move speed by 30%. It's a massive stat boost gain. When the tonic wears off, however, you will have a 20% chance to gain a tonic affliction, reducing every single stat by -5% and -5% per stack of spinal tonic you have. However, if you are actually using the tonic affliction does not affect you. So while you have the tonic boost, the stat boost from the tonic, the negative stats it gives you actually go away. So if you have Gesture of the Drowned and Fuel Cells and basically have 100% uptime on this, it doesn't matter how many tonic afflictions you have, as long as you are using the tonic, you will have this increased boost. If at any point in the game you don't have 100% uptime on your spinal tonic and you finally have to deal with the affliction, you're probably going to die, as the affliction does stack up pretty quickly. So again, S tier once you have 100% uptime on it, but any other time it's C, maybe even F. Alright, so for the last little bit, we have the elite equipment. Elite equipments are very unique items that only drop from elites and are incredibly rare. They are a 1 in 4,000% drop from its respective elite type. They are basically all not that great because they take up an equipment slot. However, there are some that are better than others. The aspect of ice, that one is F tier. You never want to use this. Basically, all it does is slow enemies. Ifrit's Distinction, which is the aspect of fire, is also a bad one as it gives you a pretty poopy DOT. Nahukana's Retort, which is an aspect of corruption, and I believe this is the one that does the Malachite elites. That one is also not very good, don't get it ever. The lightning aspect one is actually not too bad, as it attaches little lightning bombs to every attack that you shoot out, dealing 50% total damage. Although the one major downside is 50% of the player's health is replaced by shields. And finally, the invisible one, the spectral circlet, isn't bad on engineer as the turrets will allow you to have invisibility when you are nearby them. However, avoid keeping these in your inventory once you find a better equipment. They are really not that good and they get rid of the effectiveness of fuel cell and gesture of the drown, which are two of the best items in the game, so avoid these. F tier. And that's it. I didn't expect for this to go this long, but you know, sometimes you gotta do things like that. Hope you enjoyed and have a good day.